James Carter and Ryan Mitchell seemed like ordinary neighbors, but behind closed doors, they were plotting a series of crimes that would terrorize their entire town, and they had no idea they were being watched. In a town that looked ordinary on the surface, life was calm and predictable. Streets were lined with neat houses, lawns were mowed on schedule, and neighbors exchanged polite greetings over fences. Yet beneath this seemingly peaceful exterior, something sinister was quietly taking shape. Small incidents had begun to unsettle the community: vandalized mailboxes, spray-painted graffiti, and strange notes left on doors. At first, these acts were dismissed as random mischief, the kind of trouble kids might cause on a bored weekend. But patterns started to emerge. Each act of vandalism was aimed at specific households, all belonging to minority families who had lived in the town for years. What seemed like harmless pranks slowly revealed a disturbing undercurrent of hate. The police initially approached these events as minor crimes, responding with caution but not urgency. Patrols increased slightly in affected neighborhoods, yet investigators found themselves struggling to understand the motive. It wasn't until a local shopkeeper reported that the same men had been seen loitering near her store that a broader picture began to form. Witnesses described them as unremarkable at first glance, dressed in casual clothes, blending into the crowd. But their behavior was deliberate, almost predatory. They would linger near certain houses, watch families from a distance, and disappear before anyone could confront them. The fear they instilled was subtle but persistent, a shadow creeping over the lives of those they targeted. Residents began noticing the signs themselves. Flyers promoting community events were defaced with hateful symbols. Cars parked along quiet streets were keyed. Even the town's parks, where children once played freely, seemed to carry attention that wasn't there before. Conversations between neighbors became cautious. People glanced over shoulders, wondered who they could trust. In grocery stores and cafes, whispers filled the air, a collective anxiety that the police couldn't fully explain. Some families considered moving, though the thought of leaving a place they had called home for decades felt impossible. The attacks weren't just physical, they were psychological, a calculated effort to make the town feel smaller, colder, and more dangerous than it really was. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered more than just the visible acts of hate. Small items left behind at vandalized sites, a cigarette butt, a torn piece of paper, offered clues that someone was careless in their planning. There was a strange mix of caution and recklessness, as though the perpetrators enjoyed the thrill of hiding in plain sight. The police started piecing together timelines, trying to find links between each incident. Every visit to the scene revealed subtle evidence that had been overlooked: a footprint in the dirt, a discarded glove, a tire track partially washed away by rain. Each clue suggested the attackers were methodical but also growing overconfident, certain they would never be caught. The community's fear slowly turned into a shared determination. Town meetings were held to discuss safety measures, neighbors began organizing watch groups, and even children became vigilant in their own way, noticing patterns their parents sometimes missed. The calm suburban facade had been shattered, replaced by a tense awareness that danger could be lurking just around the corner. People realized the threat was real, personal, and deliberate, and that the quiet town they thought they knew was now a place where shadows could hide even in the brightest daylight. Weeks passed after the initial wave of attacks, and the town remained on edge. Each morning, neighbors would step outside to check for signs of vandalism or strange activity, their anxiety growing with every small scratch on a mailbox or every misplaced object on their property. The police, still piecing together the case, had intensified their patrols, but the attackers remained elusive, moving carefully and seemingly always one step ahead. Then, a break came from an unexpected source: a local grocery store's security camera. The footage was grainy and ordinary at first glance, showing shoppers and employees going about their business. But one frame caught the attention of detectives. Two men were seen lingering near the parking lot late in the evening, scanning the surroundings with a practiced awareness. Their behavior was deliberate, almost predatory, but nothing illegal occurred in that single moment. It was enough to spark a deeper investigation. The detectives began analyzing the footage frame by frame. Every movement, every glance, every minor hesitation was scrutinized. They noticed the men appeared to know the town well, moving confidently as if familiar with the area's layout and patrol patterns. They weren't panicked or secretive in the way someone committing a random crime might be. Instead, they seemed calculated, cautious, and surprisingly bold at the same time. Authorities began cross-referencing their appearances with reports from previous incidents, noting small but consistent details, similar clothing, similar build, the same tense, watchful mannerisms. While the footage did not provide definitive proof of criminal activity, it was enough to build a preliminary profile, giving investigators the first real sense of who they were dealing with. As law enforcement worked behind the scenes, the community's unease deepened. Rumors began circulating, some exaggerated, others grounded in observation. Neighbors shared stories of seeing unfamiliar faces near homes, cars parked suspiciously for hours, or people loitering without clear purpose. The pattern was unmistakable. The perpetrators were selecting targets and scouting locations with intent. It was no longer a question of random vandalism. It was a deliberate campaign designed to intimidate and terrorize. Every new report seemed to reinforce the fear, creating a pervasive tension that settled over the town like a thick fog. People were wary to walk alone after dark, and families double-checked locks and windows at night, hoping vigilance could compensate for the invisible threat. Detectives also uncovered subtle links between the two men in the footage and past incidents. Security camera footage from other local businesses, previously dismissed as unrelated, revealed glimpses of the same individuals near multiple crime scenes, always at unusual hours. Witnesses described seeing them leave neighborhoods immediately after incidents occurred, their behavior consistent with someone orchestrating acts of harassment with precision. The realization that these were not isolated events but a connected series of attacks changed the tone of the investigation. What had once been considered minor offenses was now understood as a coordinated effort to sow fear in a specific segment of the town's population. The discovery of these patterns brought a mix of relief and renewed anxiety. Relief because the police were finally making progress. Renewed anxiety because it confirmed the town was dealing with someone who was not only motivated by hatred but also capable of planning with remarkable skill. Detectives faced the challenge of predicting the perpetrator's next moves, understanding that every detail could hold significance. Each observation became critical. Every lingering glance, every parked car, every seemingly ordinary movement could contain a clue that might finally reveal the identity of those responsible. The town waited, holding its breath, as law enforcement began to close in on the shadowy figures who had upended their sense of safety and peace. As the investigation deepened, detectives began uncovering evidence that suggested the perpetrators were leaving more than just physical traces, they were leaving digital ones as well. Social media, once thought of as a private outlet for opinions and photos, became an unexpected window into their activities. Posts that seemed innocent at first were scrutinized for hidden meaning. Pictures of local streets, selfies taken near neighborhood landmarks, and comments about minor inconveniences were pieced together to form a pattern. Analysts noticed that some images included glimpses of locations that matched past crime scenes. Though the men had likely thought these posts harmless, each one was a breadcrumb leading investigators closer to the truth. Further examination revealed that they had a habit of sharing their extremist views online. Messages, comments, and shared content painted a clear picture of their mindset and motivations. What struck investigators most was the combination of confidence and carelessness. The men appeared meticulous in their planning of real-world actions, but careless in how they documented their thoughts and experiences online. Every post, every casual brag about a location visited or a task completed allowed law enforcement to map out movements and establish connections to previous incidents. In some cases, even the timing of the posts provided insight into when and where the men were likely committing acts of harassment or vandalism. Physical evidence began to complement the digital trail. Forensics teams recovered discarded items at crime scenes, cigarette butts, fragments of paper, and pieces of gloves that could be traced back to the suspects. Investigators realized that even small acts of carelessness could be crucial. Each object told a story, revealing patterns of behavior, preferred routes, and even the personalities of the men. It became clear that they had operated with a mix of strategy and recklessness. While careful planning allowed them to avoid immediate capture, minor oversights provided the clues necessary for law enforcement to reconstruct events and anticipate future actions. As the pieces came together, detectives saw that the men's confidence was growing. They were emboldened, believing that they could act without consequence. Their social media activity suggested they were seeking validation from like-minded individuals, not realizing that their online presence was just as incriminating as the physical evidence they left behind. Investigators treated this hubris as an advantage, using it to predict behavior and plan surveillance. Every like, comment, and post became a small piece of a larger puzzle that was gradually revealing the identities of the men responsible. The community, meanwhile, continued to live under the shadow of fear. Residents remained vigilant, monitoring streets and neighborhood activity, aware that the perpetrators could strike again at any moment. The tension was palpable, as ordinary routines were disrupted by the awareness that danger could be near even during seemingly safe daily activities. Families double-checked locks, neighbors watched for unusual behavior, and children learned to notice what adults might overlook. It was a period of heightened awareness, a collective effort to reclaim a sense of security even as the investigation inched forward. Every new discovery by law enforcement was a reminder that the men's actions were deliberate and calculated, yet each careless post or discarded item brought the possibility of justice closer, creating a fragile balance between fear and hope. The investigation reached a critical turning point when detectives decided to take a more proactive approach. They created a carefully constructed online persona designed to appeal to the suspect's sense of bravado and their desire for recognition. This digital bait was intended to lure the men into revealing more about themselves, their plans, and their network. For weeks, officers observed from behind the screens, responding with calculated prompts that encouraged the men to boast, share locations, and discuss past incidents. Every interaction was meticulously logged, analyzed for inconsistencies, and cross-referenced with existing evidence. The suspects, unaware that they were being monitored, began to reveal details they had previously kept hidden, their sense of invincibility feeding their carelessness. The detectives noticed subtle changes in the suspects' online behavior. They began testing boundaries, hinting at future actions, and seeking validation from the persona they believed was an ally. Their communications were filled with overconfidence, as though they were untouchable in the small town they thought they dominated. Investigators used this confidence to predict movements, understanding that the men's desire to impress and assert control could lead them into situations that would expose them. Every post, every message, and every photo became part of a growing map of evidence, connecting dots that had once seemed isolated or coincidental. At the same time, physical surveillance intensified. Teams were dispatched to monitor neighborhoods, businesses, and public spaces where the men were known to appear. Investigators coordinated carefully, ensuring that the suspects remained unaware of being watched while simultaneously tracking patterns that could indicate plans for further acts of harassment. Each observation, each recorded behavior, added another layer of certainty to the case. Detectives began to see a rhythm in the men's movements, times of day when they were most active, routes they preferred, and signals they used to communicate with one another. This allowed law enforcement to prepare for the moment when action could be taken safely and decisively. The tension during this phase of the investigation was palpable. Detectives had to balance patience with urgency, knowing that any misstep could alert the men and allow them to disappear once again. The community remained on edge, unaware of the precise details of the investigation but sensing the presence of law enforcement everywhere. The town's residents continued their cautious routines, watching for anything unusual, knowing that the danger was real and that the perpetrators could be anywhere. Meanwhile, investigators coordinated evidence from digital interactions, physical surveillance, and forensic analysis, gradually building a complete picture of the man's habits, motives, and networks. The breakthrough came when the suspects, convinced of their anonymity, attempted to coordinate another act of harassment through the online persona. They disclosed detailed plans, including locations, timing, and methods, fully exposing themselves without realizing the consequences. Detectives had anticipated this move, and every action had been carefully recorded, creating a comprehensive and undeniable case. It was the culmination of weeks of patient observation, digital strategy, and meticulous coordination. The men's overconfidence, which had fueled their campaign of intimidation, ultimately became the key factor in their undoing. With the trap set and every detail documented, law enforcement was ready to move decisively, knowing that the suspects had unknowingly delivered themselves into the hands of justice. The day of the arrest arrived quietly, almost unremarkably, yet it carried the weight of months of careful planning and anticipation. Law enforcement had coordinated every detail to ensure the operation was swift and decisive. Teams were positioned at multiple locations, cameras monitored entrances and exits, and backup units were ready to respond instantly. The suspects, oblivious to the net closing around them, moved with the same confidence that had carried them through previous acts. Their overconfidence, which had been evident in digital communications and social media posts, left them blind to the presence of officers watching their every move. As they approached their intended target, law enforcement waited for the precise moment to intervene. The arrest itself was executed with precision. Officers moved simultaneously from multiple positions, surrounding the suspects before they could react. Evidence collected over weeks, online conversations, photographs, discarded items, and surveillance footage was immediately documented at the scene, leaving no room for denial. The suspects were caught in the act, their hands literally and figuratively tied by the meticulous work of the investigation. There was no confusion, no opportunity for escape. Every action, from the approach to the final restraint, had been planned to minimize risk to both law enforcement and the public. The men, once confident in their anonymity and untouchability, were now entirely exposed. As the suspects were taken into custody, investigators combed through vehicles, personal belongings, and digital devices, uncovering additional proof of their activities. Phones, computers, and notebooks contained detailed records of past attacks, planned future actions, and communications with like-minded individuals who had encouraged their behavior. The scale and organization of their campaign became undeniable. Each piece of evidence linked back to earlier incidents, connecting the dots in a way that left no question of responsibility. For the first time, the town's residents could see the full scope of what had been happening, and the relief was palpable. A sense of justice began to replace the months of fear and uncertainty that had overshadowed everyday life. The impact on the community was profound. Families who had lived in constant unease could finally breathe, knowing the individuals responsible had been removed from their neighborhoods. Local businesses that had suffered vandalism could begin repairs, and residents could return to routines without the ever-present fear of harassment. The case also became a cautionary tale, highlighting how deeply hidden hatred can exist even in places that seem safe and familiar. It underscored the importance of vigilance, collaboration, and the ability of law enforcement to act decisively when patterns of criminal behavior are uncovered. In the weeks that followed, the judicial process began, and the men faced charges that reflected the full extent of their actions. The evidence collected from physical items left behind to digital footprints ensured that their attempts to intimidate and harm others could not be dismissed. Court proceedings emphasized the deliberate nature of their crimes and the psychological impact on the victims and the broader community. As the trial progressed, the town began to heal, slowly restoring the sense of safety and trust that had been shattered. The resolution of the case was a powerful reminder that careful observation, persistence, and strategic investigation could bring even the most elusive criminals to justice, leaving the town stronger and more united in the aftermath.